So the game started. He played d4. Here I played d6. And then he played e4. So now it looks as if it's going to be a paired defense. I played knight f6 to attack the pawn. But then he plays bishop to d3 to defend the pawn. Very cool idea. So I decided to play e5 immediately, seeing that his bishop is on d3, applying some pressure to his center. Then he's thinking about the move. My plan from here is just to play bishop e7 and castle. He plays c3 so that way he could keep his center intact. And then I played bishop to e7. So it's no longer a perk since we didn't fianchet to the bishop. He plays knight to e2 to develop his knight. He didn't put the knight on f3 because he wanted to play f4 in the future. So I got my king out the center of the board. Then he also got his king out the center of the board. I mean, very regular position here. I'm just thinking about how I'm planning on getting my queenside pieces in the game at this point. Then I decided to play rook to e8. I played rook to e8 because I want to take the pawn on d4, pull the bishop to f8, attack e4. f4 was just a nice move that he played. Like he's immediately going for the attack in this situation. I took the pawn on d4. He take back on d4, and I'm not gonna lie, this is excellent central control. I pull my bishop back to f8. I mean, e5 was the move I was expecting. He decided to play knight c3 instead, though, to guard the pawn. I mean, it's very solid. It's a very patient guy, and it's already kind of tricky how I'm going to be developing here. C5 is an idea. Knight c6 I didn't want to play due to d5, and bishop g4 I wanted to play, just to get rid of my light squared bishop, because usually in these kind of position the bishop on the light squares is the worst place piece. So I'm thinking about my move. I eventually decided to play c5, which is usually the better moves in these types of positions because it's very important that you attack the opponent's center. Now, e5, I wasn't too afraid of because if he plays e5, I'm just going to take on d4 at this point. And then if he takes, I take, and still I'm not really afraid of e5. But then he decided to play d5 to close the position. And the move that I have to worry about now is pawn to e5. I actually have a very nice idea here that I didn't see, which is pawn c4, because if the bishop takes on c4, it removes one of the defender of the e4 pawn, and if the bishop goes back to c2, I'm able to play b5. I decided to play a6, which is like the slower version of it, because I wanted to play b5. He didn't really care though. He played immediate knight to g3. Usually black players in these types of positions, they play a4 to prevent b5, but you know the guy was just going for blood. Like after the game he told me that he did not care about my attack on the queen side. Then eventually played b5 because I have to gain space on the queen side. So b5 here is just a nice move. I'm thinking of moves like c4, chasing away the bishop. The thing is though, how I'm planning on developing my queen side pieces is very important because I wanted to play this bishop g4 move. It's no longer possible. And I didn't necessarily want my bishop on the b7 square, but it's very important that I develop these pieces and quickly connect the rooks. And then he plays queen to f3. He's trying to bring as much of his pieces in the attack. There's not necessarily an attack right now, but what he's doing is building upon the attack. He wants to develop his bishop, swing over the rook, and just build up his pieces on the attack. So now I'm thinking about my move. I'm thinking about, do I play b4 and attack the knight? Do I play c4 and attack the bishop? Do I play bishop g4 and attack my queen? Do I play c4 and then once the bishop move, I try to play knight d7 followed by knight c5? Those were my ideas in this position. I did decided to play c4 and attack the bishop. Now c4 is a nice move, but one drawback of c4 is the d4 square is now unprotected. He pulled his bishop back to c2. I mean, I need to continue my development. So I decided to play the move knight to d7 here. A move like b4 would have been a bit more aggressive, just gain as much space on the queen side, then develop. But I tend to get uncomfortable if I'm making too many moves and my development is not complete. This is where he played bishop to e3. Just a very nice move, developing his bishop. The bishop could very well get to the d4 square. And if this bishop is on the d4 square, it controls all of this. Now, this is actually just as the position that I have is a slightly worse position of the pair. If it was a peer, my bishop would have already been on g7 controlling this diagonal. But my bishop is not on g7 controlling the diagonal, so I have to be very careful. I'm trying to target his pawn on e4, but e4 is just guarded so much here. I played queen to c7 to ensure that I am keeping an eye on this pawn coming to e5. So he only has like one piece covering the square. I have like four of my pieces covering the square. Now I was thinking about e5, and then if I takes, he plays d6 and then attack my rook. But I was planning on playing queen back to b8 there, so I was fine with that decision. Now he played rook to e1. Now I want you guys to notice how my opponent is just using all his pieces at this point. Like, there's no piece that my opponent is not using. So this is very, very good development from the white side. And that's when I played bishop to b7. And again, better than bishop to b7 would have been b4 to chase the knight, then a5, followed by bishop a6. So that way my bishop is on this diagonal instead of putting my bishop on b7. But I did put the bishop on b7 so that way, if he ever thinks of moving this pawn, his d pawn also weakens. But this is where you guys are going to be seeing my opponent trying to start an attack on the king. I mean, he successfully did everything that he needed to do in the opening. He moved all his pieces. I mean, I also moved all my pieces. So opening wise, the position is decent. If you look on the evaluation bar, though, it is leaning towards white a bit more because of the space advantage that white has. So, after some thought about his move, he finally made the decision to play bishop to d4. Just a very good improving move. Like, again, all his pieces were active, but he's still trying to look for ways to bring even more pieces in the game. Now, this was where I was like, okay, I'm thinking of playing g6 followed by bishop g7 to just ensure that my knight has some defense and I could try to counter against this e5 push. But for one, I thought it was a bit too slow, and I'm also looking out for this pawn coming to f5. And if I play this move, well, if the pawn goes to f5 now, it weakens the e5 square. But if in the future it goes to f5, he could open the f file and start some crazy attacks on my king. Yeah, so this is where I'm really thinking about the position, because at this point in the game, it's kind of hard to move my kingside pieces. And I really wanted to start something, especially on the queen side. So here I'm like, okay, I need to start an attack somewhere. My opponent is definitely going to be attacking in the center and on the king side. So my attack should come from attacking on the queen side. So after my very first long think, if you look on the clock in this position, you notice that the opponent has about 2 minutes more than me. I decided to play pawn to b4, attacking the opponent's knight, starting my attack on the queen side. So I was expecting him to play knight a4. The knight is not active on a4 though, it's on the edge of the board. So I was fine in that position. A5 to continue with my attack would have been what I played there. So my opponent is basically thinking about where will he put the knight? Like, do I put the knight on d1 or e2 or a4? I mean, these are all decent scores for the knight, except a4, except the edge of the board. The computer likes knight d1 because from d1, the knight is able to go to e3, then to f5, which is just a very cool maneuver here. That's what my opponent did. He pulled the knight back to d1, going for this very cool maneuvering idea. Like, I want you guys to notice how persons play at the higher level. I was actually just with a student just now who we were playing a game and he was trying to attack me. And he started his attack so early. Like other persons would have tried to immediately start their attack, and immediately going for the king. But this guy, he's definitely trying to attack, but he wants to ensure that all his pieces are working. So this was the time when I played pawn to a5. In this position, I'm trying to either play a4 followed by b3. I'm trying to make either c3 work. And I'm also thinking about moves like a6, pawn c3, so that way my bishop gets a better diagonal. And now he plays knight e3. I mean, the knight doesn't really do much on d1. He's bringing the knight in the game. And this was the whole idea that we looked on, like the idea of just maneuvering his knight to the king. Now, the bishop points towards my king. This bishop points towards my king. There's two knights that is ready to jump in. And he definitely has plans of doing some pawn breaks. So white has a very aggressive position here. The computer is saying it's a plus 1.6 advantage for white. So, I mean, I'm not completely losing here. White is just a bit better. So, because I think he was really planning on starting some attack on my king side, I decided to play pawn to b3, which is a pawn sacrifice, by the way, just to immediately start my attack on the queen side. So, if you check the count, he is covering the square twice. I am covering the square once. But I intentionally sacrificed this pawn so that way, after pawn takes, bishop takes, I'm able to get some activity for my pieces. Because what I was looking on is I'm just not able to move my knight to c5 or just move my d7 knight any at all. Because if I move my d7 knight, he takes on f6, and then my f6 knight didn't really have a square. So he's really thinking about the move. I mean, it's a pawn sacrifice, so he has to look on possible tactics in the position. After a long think, he took on a3. I immediately take back on b3. His bishop is now under attack, and he's still thinking about taking on b3 if I have, a trick or anything. But my idea is just to attack his bishop on b3. And then once he moves the bishop, I pull my knight back to d7. So that way my position becomes a bit more active. He thought about it for a while, finally decided to take, and that's when I played knight to c5, attacking the bishop. Now, bishop to a6, attacking the rook first, would have been a bit more active or a bit better. So that way, once the rook moved, that's when ideas of knight d3 could have been played. So I think one thing I'm doing wrong in these live games that I'm showing you guys is sometimes I'm using up my time, but there's other times when I literally just take 1 second to move, you know? So my opponent is thinking about where is he gonna put the bishop? He pulls the bishop back to c2. His bishop is now back on this diagonal, which is being guarded by the knight. So no tactics here. And that's when I decided to pull my knight back to d7. So, okay, I'm not going to lie. White is much better in this position because, for one, I'm down by a pawn, and two, his attack is really coming in. And I think the other thing that I did was to move my pieces away from defending my king because I wanted some form of activity on the queen side, and you're about to see exactly how the opponent decides to approach this situation. So first thing he did was he decided to play the move queen to g4, which is a very nice move because queen to g4 puts the queen on the same line as my king. And with that being said, there's automatically moves like bishop takes g7 that is possible because now if I take on g7, knight to h5 pins the knight, and I will be getting checkmated on g6. So this was a critical point in the game for me. So I started to think here. I think I thought for around 3 minutes, decided to finally play g6, which is the best defensive move. But usually you don't want to be pushing pawns on the side that your king is on, which is why it took me some time to find g6. So a lot of pieces is about to come in. I'm thinking about any of these knights coming to f5. The good thing is my bishop covers the h6 square, so I'm fine. A knight could also go to h5, then to f6, which means I need to ensure that I leave my knight on this d7 square. So this is where the opponent is really starting his attack. He plays the move knight to h5. Knight h5 left the e4 pawn unprotected, but it's actually a trick. If I take on e4, he takes on e4, and then he's gonna sack his queen. And once my queen takes, he plays knight f6, and I'm actually losing, or I could even be getting checkmated. So I'm definitely not gonna be taking this pawn on e4. Instead, I just need to activate my pieces. For some reason, I'm thinking about playing bishop a6 and attacking the rook and just not playing it. Especially here, I didn't want to play bishop a6 and allow him to find rook to f3 because rook to f3 would be him bringing more pieces in the game. My opponent has a minute 30 on his clock. I have 3 minutes 40 on my clock. So it's about to get straight down to the wire here. So this is where I'm like, okay, we need to defend our king. So I decided to pull the bishop back to c8. The bishop is on the same line as the queen. So I'm thinking about just, moving my knight anywhere so that way his queen is under attack. The bar went down a bit more, so it's just a hard position to defend. I'm not gonna lie, it's a very hard position to defend. The computer says bishop a6 was best. Like, it's just so important that my rooks are connected. This is where he played pawn to f5. A very nice move because the thing is, now my bishop will not be attacking his queen. He doesn't necessarily need to worry about the fact that my bishop is on the same line as his queen. And I was thinking about just playing rook to e5 here and just give him the exchange and play down material so that way I can get some counterplay. But I wasn't really planning on, I didn't want to give the guy any material, to be honest. So I decided to play queen to d8. Like, I'm just bringing pieces closer to my king so that way they can defend my king. Because I'm thinking about takes, and then sacking the rook on f7, and then this rook comes over to f1 with check. So at this point, I think my queen is better off on e7 rather than c7. Now, the game is about to go down to the wire. My opponent's time is running out here. So he decided to take on g6. I was thinking about taking on h6, but then if I take on h6, again, the move I'm worried about here is just rook takes f7, which is just a nice move. That would have actually been a brilliant move, by the way, and the computer didn't even see it. So I decided to take with the f pawn. Now, whether or not rook f7 is still good, it doesn't really work. So his knight is also not under attack, seeing that this is happening. So the guy just has so much activity at this point. The only thing I could say is I have a lot more time than him. He pulls the queen back to f3. Very nice move. He's immediately threatening checkmate on f7. So we have to defend against this checkmate. He only has 32 seconds on the clock, though. So if I could just defend my king here and his attack doesn't work, he could be in some trouble. So I quickly decided to play queen to e7 so that way his queen is not able to come to f7. Now there are moves like knight to f5, which would be crazy because this knight is under attack, and then if I takes, he takes, my rook is under attack. I'm actively also trying to play the move knight to e5. I'm trying to put my bishop on h6, and he decided to play knight to f6 check. I immediately took. He decided to take with the bishop. He's not trying to trade queens, seeing that he's attacking. So now I just need to find a good square for my queen. Now, f7 is definitely a square for my queen, and it wouldn't be bad to try to trade the pieces off the board, seeing that I'm under attack. Generally, you don't want to be trading once you're down in material, but queen f7 is actually a nice idea because I shouldn't worry too much about not trading queens when there are so many pieces that is ready to point towards my king. So as you guys can see, the game is getting down to the wire. He has 26 seconds. My time is also running out. I move my queen to a7 because on a7, the queen is on the same diagonal as the king. And then he immediately plays e5. That was a nice move, by the way. I did not see pawn to e5. He's trying to do some pawn break. He's trying to get his rook and his bishop in the game at the same time. Now he's either threatening to push the pawn and just cramp my position or just take on d6. Either way, I just do not think it's good for me to allow the pawn to be on e5. So that's why I decided to take on e5. Plus, my bishop guards my knight in this situation. Now, once my bishop takes, this was the only point where I could have gotten a little advantage, where I should have played bishop a6. I'm not able to take the bishop because of mate, but if I play bishop a6, attack the rook and the rook move, then I'm able to take. So if I play bishop a6, he has to find knight g4, and then I play knight d7, and then black gets the advantage. Now, for some weird reason, I did not see that move. And one thing I needed to keep in mind is I need to connect the rooks. And this is the reason why you guys need to ensure that your rooks are pointing towards each other whenever you're playing. I decided to quickly play bishop to h6 though. And yeah, bishop h6 was actually a blunder. Yeah, this was actually probably the worst move on the board. If you look on the evaluation bar, it's going crazy. And my opponent did find bishop d4, which just guards the knight, it pins my knight. So this is where I just need to be super careful. And I finally need to connect my rooks. Now both our time is low. I play bishop to a6, hit the rook. He has 19 seconds on the clock. I only have 40 seconds on the clock. Anything could go wrong here. He plays pawn to d6, which is a brilliant move. By the way, left his rook hanging because if I take the rook in, there's just too many weaknesses pointing towards my king. So I'm like, I'm not taking that rook. I also did not have enough time to calculate what happens if I take the rook. So I was more focused on the attack here, but please do not judge me for the next move that I'm about to play. But I did play bishop back to b7 to attack the queen, and that is a drawback blunder because my queen is no longer covering the f7 square. Now, it's actually a checkmate. Queen to f7 is a checkmate, but the opponent has 10 seconds on the clock. So he didn't even see it. He's panicking. He took on c5 and he counterattacks my queen. I immediately take on c5, and then he decided to play bishop to b3, checking my king. Now, I have to move the king, obviously. I'm not sure why I thought about this move so long, but I just moved my queen out of the way. Now, his knight on e3 is hanging. My bishop on b7 is hanging. There's crazy stuff happening. This pawn on d6 is just so annoying. And then he finally decided to take, and then I took on e3, and then he immediately moves his king over to h1. So the game is getting down to the wire now. One slight mistake will cause someone the game. And one thing, again, I think I need to work on is just when I should really think about my move. Rook to b8 was a nice move. It hits the queen, it forces the queen to, well, it doesn't force the queen to move. He left the queen hanging and he plays pawn d7. If I take his queen, he takes my rook, promote, get back the queen, and then I'm actually losing. So I can't touch his queen here. His queen is poisoned, which means d7 was a great move. I did not see that move, by the way. So I'm scratching my head. I immediately move my rook to f8. The time is running out. I have 23 seconds. He has 23 seconds. Like again, a slight mistake will cause anybody the game here. Now, my opponent is thinking about his move. His time is on 9 seconds. It's running out. Seven, six, five. And then he immediately took the rook and I immediately take back. So I have, wait, what? My time was still running out. But if you notice, it's actually my opponent's time to move, but my time is running. So he pulled his queen back to e4, but my time was still running out, man. And then now I have like 5 seconds on the clock. Four, three, two. I have to play. I immediately pull the bishop back. Now I have 11 seconds on the clock. He has 10 seconds on the clock. Again, anything could go wrong here. It's also opposite colored bishop. And then he played queen to d8, and I immediately played queen to b4. And then I needed to just protect it, and then he promoted. I sat the queen quickly, and then he take back, and I took, and okay, now the guy just has a queen, and I'm like, damn, I can't believe I'm actually losing this game. So I took the pawn on b2. He decided to take my pawn, and then I played bishop to e5, and I'm like, what was that? That's just a piece, and then that's mate, and I resign.